Give me 10 seconds here to get that going. And okay, so that should be going now. Okay, it's recording. So the April 7th agenda will be finalizing the amphibians questions package, hopefully, reviewing the AMPC charter and amending if needed, and then looking at the Eastern Oregon Steep Slopes scoping proposal from the IRST and responding to their questions. And that's something you folks can discuss perhaps if and how you want to how you want to go about addressing those. And then the one update is really that the IRST's roads scoping proposal is delayed until March 12th. I'm sorry, May 12th. So just to make note of that. So I kind of motored through that opening stuff pretty quickly. Any other questions or comments before we get going on the conversation about amphibians questions? Not seeing any. Stacy, would you like to work off the PowerPoint today and just like have each question on the slide? What would
I
your
think if you could just pull up the Word version, and just for a little bit of context for this group, as a quick reminder, we met on February 3rd and we spent a lot of time about question one and kind of wordsmithing that as a group. And my take on that was that question one was looking pretty close. So I'm hoping that that is everyone else's recollection. Hopefully, you had a chance to go back and review when Seth and Terry and I met. For clarity, we just pulled out the actual questions with sort of the highlighted, like, this is sort of potential decision. But the full, like, regular question package with the context, that is what Terry also sent around as version 5. So that work hasn't gone away. Just for the purpose of this conversation, we wanted to pull out the actual questions so we could be really clear on those. So yeah, if you can just share that Word doc, Terry, that would be great.
Yes, I'm working on
Okay,
that.
no worries. Just wanted to make sure I had actually
Yeah,
asked you
yeah.
to do that.
Yep.
So then my hope for today is that we can sort of run through these as a whole, look at question one, question two, which we also discussed quite a bit. And then question three was sort of that bucket of sub questions that I think there was some really good conversation and debate around what those look like, what their purpose is, and, are these appropriate to fold into a question package? Is there another pathway for those questions? So hopefully that just helps remind everyone sort of where we left the conversation at our last meeting. And our hope today is that we could be able to move forward on at least one of these. And I think, like I said, question one was sounding pretty close. Um, and then have some conversation about questions two and question three. So thanks, Terry, for pulling those up. So maybe I'll just pause there and just check in. Does anyone have questions or comments, or Seth, anything you want to add as far as context setting?
No, you did a good job. I hopefully we can, and if the committee is feeling like we're there or pretty close on question one, then maybe we even take this in stages and sort of if we've got consensus around a question, let's move to that, and then if we have discussion on others, we can kind of take it sequentially that way and kind of work our way through and use the hour and get there. That's our hope. I
Thanks,
feel like
Seth.
we were really close at the end of the last meeting, and we just really needed a little bit of extra time, and hopefully people have prepped for that, and we'll kind of pick up where we left off if we can.
Great. Okay. So if there's no other, that's sort of like the big picture zoom out of sort of where we're headed. But I liked your proposal, Seth, of kind of just starting with question one. And hopefully folks have this document up and they can look at it as well if they need to. But great. Thanks, Terry. So I don't know that I need to read this out loud to you all. You've got it in front of you. Maybe just take a second to look at this one again. I guess the bit of context or foundational setting for this question is it's really that sort of baseline question of understanding where these species are, what they're doing in the landscape, things that maybe we already know and just hasn't been pulled together, or maybe we don't really know. So that's sort of like baseline question. Any clarifying questions on question one or comments on question one? And then I'm going to do a little just like temperature check. What is it? 0 to 5. Five's like feeling good about it. Zero's like absolutely no way, can't vote for it. So any just like overarching questions on question one or clarifying questions? Wendy?
I just have the comment that I like question one the way it is, but it's essentially a baseline kind of question. And I think it's really important in order to move forward with our work that we're directed to do under the report, that it be linked to the next step of a question two, where we go beyond the baseline and start talking about the persistence of the species and the relationship to the rules.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, Wendy. And my hope again is that sharing the whole possible package with you all provides that context. I think trying to take them one at a time is just a good first step, but I agree. Yeah. Any other clarifying questions on question one? Okay, maybe a quick show of hands if you can on video, or if you're on chat, maybe just 0 through 5 in the chat. 5 again is question one is looking pretty good. Feeling like you could probably move forward. Okay, I'm seeing 5s. Anyone at the lower end of that or concerns? Okay. So again, Wendy, with your comment in mind, to me, this is not a standalone. This wouldn't be the only thing we're moving forward, but I think we had envisioned voting these each as their own question just to advance, because I think the ones later will require more conversation. So my thought is to ask for a motion on question one to move that into a question package. Would anyone be willing to make that motion?
I so move. This is Julie.
I
I'll
second.
second.
Wendy.
Oh, I heard Julie and then a second from Wendy. Do we have actual motion language, Terry? Sorry. Okay.
Sorry, I don't have that prepared.
This one should
And I
be,
think this one is straightforward enough that it's a,
Yeah.
you're just moving this forward into a question package.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So Julie moved, Wendy seconded. Do we have any conversation, additional comments? Okay. Then do we move that to a vote, Terry?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I can do a roll call if you'd like, or,
Sure, that'd be great.
okay, Seth Barnes,
yes.
Dave Bugney,
Yes.
Adam Coble. Oh, no, I'm sorry, you're not voting. Sorry, Adam. Stacy Detweiler,
Yes.
Julie Furman,
Yes.
Wendy Gerlach,
Yes.
Casey Kula,
Yes.
Jason Robeson,
Yes.
Josh Seeds,
Yes.
Amanda Sullivan Astor,
Yes.
William Tucker.
Yes.
So it passes 10-4, 0 opposed.
Great. So just to clarify, this means that we have decided that question one will move forward into a question package on amphibians. So there will still be a vote about the full question package. We're not there yet, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. Great. Thank you all for taking the time to sort of refresh memories on that one so we could move through that one quickly. Terry, could you scroll down to question 2 and question 3? Sort of maybe both on there. Yeah, perfect. So again, just as a little bit of context on question 2, and you have I think it's V5 that should have all the track changes and sort of the history of these questions. But and thank you again to the work group members for your work in putting those together. But question 2 is a little more higher level. What is the persistence of Columbia and Southern Torrent salamanders over time in the landscape? So it does narrow in on specific species. To Wendy's point, doesn't necessarily make a direct connection to rules or BGOs, but is important in sort of that broader context question. And then question 3 is all of the sub questions, which we did. Did we edit these a little bit? We discussed these at length, and that's really sort of making specific connections between particular rule sections, although not defined. We just say road crossings and those 2 salamander species with links to the biological goals and objectives. We had a lot of good discussion around those and questions whether they were more in the effectiveness monitoring lens, are these appropriate for this question package? Are they too detailed? Do they best live elsewhere? So I'm just gonna maybe pause because I think I would like to see if we can move forward with question 2. Speaking for myself personally, not necessarily with co-chair hat on, I think that the question 3 questions are really important, and I would like to see a clear pathway for them if they're not included directly in a question package for amphibians, that there's either a clear plan for them to be in the future or that they are incorporated into the effectiveness monitoring. So just that's sort of where me personally am sitting. But I want to open it up maybe for general comments if folks are feeling like moving forward with question 2 is possible, or if linking those, if we need to have a longer conversation about those. Josh.
So the questions on question 3, I think the work group actually did a lot of work that probably the effectiveness monitoring work group would need to do in the future. So, because those really, especially with the tie into biological goals and objectives, those really look like they're good effectiveness monitoring questions for amphibians, like linking the rules to amphibian habitat and populations. But we're going to need to ask, I think, pretty similar questions about the covered fish species as we develop effectiveness monitoring. So it might be that we want to take those questions and say this is a really good framework for effectiveness monitoring questions on amphibians, tying amphibian habitat and population health to the forestry rules. So maybe we do want to move those question 3 questions and pass those off to the effectiveness monitoring group which includes me, and is gonna have to develop probably similar questions for aquatic species. I think the amphibians work group did a really nice job figuring out what are the effectiveness questions related to amphibians. On question 2, so that would be my suggestion, would be that we say that those question 3 questions are really important, but I don't know, my suggestion would be to make them part of the effectiveness monitoring that I think is one of our, after we get amphibians out and deal with any feedback or necessary decisions on the roads question we already sent out and the Eastern Oregon steep slopes work. I think next up is effectiveness monitoring. So I would say it might be a good idea to pass those on to effectiveness monitoring. On question 2, I'm thinking it's coming across to me as a little vague. Like, is that how they're doing now? Or is that how they're likely to be doing as the new rules are the norm? Um, it, it just, so yeah, kind of 2 parts. Question 3, my suggestion is we kind of move that to effectiveness monitoring. But we definitely don't lose those because those are really good effectiveness monitoring questions. But on question 2, it's coming across to me as kind of vague. Like, I'm not quite sure what it really means. Persistence in space and time. How are they doing now, or is that covered in question 1? I don't, yeah, I'm not sure what question 2's really asking, I guess.
Thanks, Josh. I think I'm there with you because I sort of struggled summarizing it for you all. I saw, sorry, Wendy's hand, and then Seth and Amanda put something in the chat. So Wendy, Seth, and Amanda, if you can speak.
Yeah, I also had reservations about the way before there's been a lot of formatting of the questions, but there used to be like a paragraph that was the lead in, the broader context lead in to that very narrow question 2 that we have right now. And I do think that question 2 right now just seems so generic that it's not very directive. You know, what it says in the report is that that this work, the initial 1.5 million be initially applied to understand how riparian and unstable slope protections impact persistence of populations. So at least something like that. We could even just quote from the report to make it clear that we are looking at, you know, the rules and forest practices and how they impact persistence of population. That's on page what? 121 of the report.
I think we've got that in the slides as well, if we need to pull that up for anyone. Yes, thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that callback. Terry, I don't know if it's possible to just like pop that report language in there under question 2, just so we can see it. I don't know if you've got that handy, but if not, I'm going to move to Seth, Amanda's comment, and then Julie. Seth, go for it.
Yeah, so Terry, as far as what you're typing in there now, I would caution doing that, just because then that question starts looking very much like the ones below, because you would have to then tease out each individual rule that could potentially, and then that ends up being those same questions, which are like those are good questions, right? I think question 2, the idea, and this was at least what I had in my mind as I was reading and crafting and thinking about question 2, it had more to do with setting up sort of a long-term monitoring of the population. So question 1 is where do they exist, right? And then question 2 is more and where do they exist for all of the species that we're covering under the HCP. And question 2 hones in specifically for the torrents and says, okay, now that we know where they exist, based on question 1, and we've done some, research to see where they are in these watersheds, and we have a pretty good idea of where they are and at what levels we're finding them. Now we need to set up some sort of a long-term monitoring effort where we would go back and determine what that population is looking like. That could then be very useful as we go on to do the questions under question 3, because that long-term monitoring effort would coincide with some of these sort of one-off questions of, okay, now how is the RMA affecting them? How is the ELZ affecting them? How is the fish passage rules affecting them for predation or whatever? And we can start to ask those questions, but we'll know that stuff in context with an ongoing monitoring effort, looking at their habitat persist or their their population persistence on those lands where we are finding them. And that would be a really important and helpful piece of information. So that was my thought, and why I thought it was important to elevate that early on. I would be all for voting for question 2 as part of the package right now. I like your idea, Stacy, of like, I was in favor from the beginning of keeping the questions under question 3 in some sort of format, and moving them into effectiveness monitoring, I think is a fine way to do that as well. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Seth. I wanted to flag Amanda had something in the chat. I don't know if she's able to speak. She may be busy, but she said, since question 1 is only about distribution and question 2 ties to this by way of physical habitat, also wondering if we can incorporate anything about population health. During joint Oregon SAF and Oregon TWS annual meeting, there was a presentation on a fungal infection that's also affecting salamanders.
Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty with translating.
Okay. Yes, questions about, it sort of gets to Seth's question, I think, around the monitoring piece of question 2. Julie, and then Will, I think we're next.
Yeah, so the way I saw this is that first one is status and then this one is trend, which are two pretty important components of the status of a species. And then the other important thing there would be limiting factors, which the questions below include. So I think in some form, I think it's important that we have a question like this. I agree that the wording is a little vague, but I'd still be comfortable with it going forward.
Julie, not to put you on the spot, but as someone who is more familiar with this than maybe me, I mean, any suggestions to make that a little more precise, that question 2, to sort of get to the trend piece that you're you can
I mean,
think about it.
I think both. I'm not. It's harder to get at persistence. You need a long time series to do persistence. Maybe we should say trend rather than persistence.
And how, sorry to ask maybe a dumb question, but how would you differentiate those two? Like in your mind, trend?
Well, when I
What's the
see
time scale?
persistence, I'm assuming you're putting that into I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the term now. You're putting that into a model that usually requires like 20 years of data on abundance in order to say what is the likelihood of extinction or persistence over the next 100 years, right? That's a common question that we make, but it requires infinitely more data than we have. So we wouldn't be able to actually do that sort of analysis for quite a while, even if we had robust monitoring in place. A trend I see more as like a snapshot, like, are we going up or are we going down? Not what's the likelihood that the population is going to continue to exist.
Would it be more, in your mind, sort of along that vein, appropriate to say trend instead of persistence?
I think so. Especially how Seth described it just recently too. That sounded like trend. We trending up and down.
Seth, I see you're nodding. I'm just going to jump to you real quick. Does that track
Yeah.
with? Okay.
I think so. I'm not. I think you captured it. If Julie is, if there's some use of the word persistence, which means like some super large and long time frame. That was not my intent. So, or I don't think that was the intent of the group that was coming up with these even. So population trend, that's probably more accurate. That's fine. That works.
Adam, I saw you put your hand up. Are you responding to this particular piece or something? Okay. Just in case you had something to add on trend or persistence. Will, you're next, I think, in the queue.
So I just wanted to comment that I was very happy when it was population when we talked about that. But persistence for me tied it back to the PFA. And so I liked that changed my whole thinking that it is persistence. It is trying to potentially do over a long period of time, including looking backwards for any previous historical information we have, any material we have, and try to draw that in to as we move forward. So I'm happy with population trend, but I had been very happy when the word population was taken out, because that was, I think, something I was pushing for, and was changed to persistence. But I can go either way. But I like this question, but I do think it does set up question 3.
Thanks, Will. Adam?
So I have a suggestion on landscape, but I don't want to derail the conversation, Stacy. So if there's more on population trend, I can wait for my comment.
Maybe let me just do a quick little thumbs up, thumb middle, thumb down. Are folks feeling like population trend, given capturing potentially a shorter time frame as opposed to maybe 20 plus years into the 100-year range that is implied by persistence? And Julie maybe can correct me if I'm mischaracterizing that. Julie?
Yeah, I'm not really tied to changing persistence to trend. It was just kind of thinking ahead to how researchers might interpret what they were trying to do. But I'd be willing to support either.
Okay, so I guess I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing that folks are generally okay with either one. Does anyone feel really strongly to change to population trend or to keep persistence? Or is everyone sort of like both of those terms would capture what we're trying to ask here?
I think population trend is more precise, and I prefer that.
I'm not sure who was first. Sorry, Will or Wendy. Will, do you want to go first? Oh, you're muted.
I apologize. Didn't lower my hand.
Oh, okay. Wendy.
Yeah, hey, well, I know that Julie and Josh know more about this than I do, but I kind of like linking it to the language of the report again, because the report is just got one paragraph in there about what we're supposed to be doing, and it does say, quote, how the rules for private forest land impact, quote, persistence of population. So I do kind of, because the work of the Accord's been done in terms of setting us on our course, I kind of like using that word. In terms of like giving better, more scientific, for scientists, maybe they would read that differently, but including both might be a way to go.
And I'll just jump in here real quick. I mean, from my 2 cents, I'm not saying that I don't support the language in the report, but as Stacy knows, when we were putting that report together, when that Stacy knows better than I do because she was there at the table when the report was being written. I think the idea of population trend would totally fit with what they had in mind. I'm just trying to marry Josh's feeling and Julie's feeling that maybe population trend is a better term. And assuage your concern, Wendy, that somehow the authors would be offended by persistence versus population trend. I think that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy, you were kind of there at that table, but it seems to me like that is still within the same spirit of what was written on that page.
Yeah, I think that's right, Seth. And I don't want to tangent back to question 3, but to me, the heart of that is really the connection between the rules, and then the habitat and persistence. So less focused on whether it's persistence or population trend. Will, and then Amanda.
So Oxford Dictionary says persistence, the continued or prolonged existence of something. I think persistent for me would be the word, but I'm not gonna, I would vote for either to move it forward.
Okay. I'm going to take one more comment on this, and then I'm going to move us along because we're 9:35. So Amanda.
Yeah, just really quick. I think that this is all good, and hopefully my words in the chat made a little bit of sense at least. I think my biggest concern with the kind of what I highlighted with this fungus that I know nothing about but learned a little bit about during a presentation is just that italicized language underneath question 2 is really focuses the question squarely around forest practices, and I want to make sure that the researchers would be looking at all of the different components that could affect population trend or persistence over time in the landscape. So I guess I can't remember, I don't have the packet up in front of me right now. So I can't remember exactly how it's all coordinated in there or worded in there. And if really the intent is to really laser focus it on just looking at forest practices and how those would affect or could affect population trend, or if it's kind of the suite of anything that could be affecting population trend.
Adam, do you want to respond to that, or did you have another
Yeah,
comment?
I think I understand what Amanda was saying, and it kind of ties in with my suggestion is around the term the landscape, and I think that one suggestion would be to narrow in on two pieces of the landscape would be like private forest land or land implemented or FPA where FPA applies or something to that effect, and maybe the HCP could use but has better language there, and so there's that piece, and then the other second part of the landscape would be maybe more broadly reference conditions. So I think what Amanda was saying that there could be other factors at play which we wouldn't be able to tease apart unless you know, to understand what the forest practices sort of effect is, you need to look at areas where it's that's not being implemented.
Adam, do you have a suggestion? I was tracking you, and I mean, I agree in concept with the reference conditions, that I'm not sure how that would be integrated into this question. Did you have a suggestion for that?
So what Emily has, I think there is good. My suggestion would be to add and reference conditions.
Sorry, just what part of that is that sentence?
What's that?
What part? Just at the end?
I didn't hear you, Stacy.
Oh, I'm just not tracking, but I think Emily's got
Where
it.
reference conditions fits into the sentence?
Yeah, are implemented and reference conditions. Or reference locations or
Oh, okay.
yeah, we could.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. I'm sorry, I didn't see whose hand was up first. Terry, Seth.
Just to this is sort of a meta comment that don't forget that these are researchers who are, while they might be testing the effectiveness of FPA rules, inherent in that is also teasing out the things that are not the effect. So there's things like reference conditions and space for time substitution and these other techniques that are going to be baked into how they do their work, so that it's absolutely you need to make sure that if you're seeing a decline or an increase, what are the factors affecting that? So just sort of making sure that that's part of the conversation, that you don't necessarily need to specify the how. It's just these need to be addressed, and I think the researchers will that's part of their bread and butter, tease that out.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I feel like it's very helpful to consistently remind ourselves of that. Like our task is really just to narrow in on what's the actual question. It doesn't have to be a perfect scientific question. We don't need to think about all the factors that the scientists are going to be contemplating, but really what do we want to know the answer for? And they will then help us figure out how to do that. So thank you for that framing, Terry. Seth, and then I'm going to make a proposal for a next step here with the 20 minutes that we've got left. Oh, you're muted, Seth.
Yeah, there we go. So I was just going to suggest, instead of FPA rules are implemented, where I was going to suggest you say FPA rules apply, because implemented, they're going to have to tease out what does that mean that they were implemented right there. Does a road that goes through that area count? Does a reforestation that was just done count? You know, it makes it more vague. But when you say where the rules apply, then you're that's a lot easier to sort of tease out where those rules apply, and then those areas would fall into this. Otherwise, I'm okay with this. I think the reference locations is a little bit, they'll have to figure out what that means. They would likely have done that either way. And I think that's okay. I think that's fine. Personally.
I think I saw Wendy then Jason. Apologies. I was reading my screen.
Yeah, I think question 2 works pretty well. Now, personally, I would take out compared to reference locations, because I think that's part of for the scientists to make that decision. And I would just say that question the way it is right now, ending with apply, and would be fine with me to vote on. I would like to make it clear that the italicized language that follows is part of our question, that we're voting on that. So we could do that just by unitalicizing it and putting it right next to that. But that highlighted language plus what is our question 2, I'd be happy to move ahead and vote on that.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. Jason, and then I'm going to do a temperature check here.
Perfect. No, I'm very supportive of that, and thanks, Seth, for your comments as well. I was just going to say, when we talk about FPA rules apply, there was a question we raised at the last meeting where we were talking about bringing in ODF staff to kind of go through this and refine, both for this question and going into question 3, kind of where the rules might apply and what those rules might be. I'm just curious, Terry, if that's something we still would need to do with this question, because the way it's written now, I do definitely support it. Is that some additional information we want to provide with the question?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite grasp your question. If you could.
So we had talked about when it comes to the FPA rules, we talked about using ODF staff to really apply what those rules are and where they apply. Do we need any context or guidance to add to this question, I guess was my question.
I think that is better served probably through the short answer is yes. I think that's better in the contextual information to make sure that they're looking at that. So it doesn't need to be part of the research question necessarily. I think it's sort of more succinct to have something like what you've got. And then, by the way, where FPA rules apply is like this. And
Can I make, and I know you're trying to move quickly, Stacey, so I'll say this. But one last suggestion, it just occurred to me that where FPA rules apply might also still be, if you were not, it might be even more clear to say on lands where the Forest Practices Act is applicable or something like that. You know what I mean? Just so they're not like, okay,
Yeah.
where does this rule apply? That rule apply? I just want to make it as clean as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. That's been getting that language right has brought up questions in other contexts. So I totally agree. More clarity there is very useful. Okay. Let's take a second, look at question 2. I think we've had some good conversation around kind of narrowing in on the time frame, better clarifying the place that we're talking about. And then I would like to see just a temperature check. Again, 5 is like, yes, this is looking really good. I'm ready to vote now. No fingers is absolutely not. This needs a ton of work. Can I just get a feel for where folks are on question 2. And again, this is just moving it forward to be part of the question package. We will have a vote on the full package. Okay. Great. I'm seeing 4s and 5s. 4, 5. Okay. Anyone in the 0, 1? Okay. So my proposal would be then, if anyone would like to make a motion on question 2, again, the motion would be to take question 2 as drafted here, move that forward into a question package for this group to vote on, likely at our next meeting. Would
Stacy,
anyone like?
I'll
Oh,
make that motion. This is
great.
Jason.
Thanks, Jason. Second?
Tucker will second.
Motion by Jason, Will seconds. Any discussion? Josh?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm just getting ready to vote.
Okay. All right. Terry, can you call the roll for us?
I guess I would offer one piece instead of, and I'm sorry to be belaboring this point, but on lands subject to the Forest Practices Act rules would probably be the most clear way to say that, rather than FPA is applicable. That would be a friendly amendment if the if you are willing to do it, Jason. And
I'll accept that amendment, Seth.
Okay. So with the friendly amendment by Seth, amended motion to move forward with question 2. Any discussion? Okay. Terry, can you call our roll here? And again, this is to move question 2 into the question package for more discussion and a full vote, likely at our next meeting.
Yep. Seth Barnes,
Yes.
David Buckney,
Yes.
Stacy Detweiler,
Yes.
Julie Furman,
Yes.
Wendy Gerlach,
Yes.
Casey Kula. He might have had to step out, or so we'll circle back in just a moment. Jason Robison,
Yes.
Josh Seeds,
Yes.
Amanda Sullivan Astor,
Yes.
William Tucker,
Yes.
and Casey. Are you there?
Yes, sorry about that.
You're yes. Okay, so that's
I'm
10
a yes,
for-
and I'm here.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. 10 for, 0 opposed.
Great. Awesome. Love the quick moving. And we've had a lot of conversation around this. Just for the record, this is not the first time we've talked about this, but I appreciate everyone moving through this quickly. The third piece that I would be interested, I don't know that it necessarily requires a vote, maybe it does, but a few folks have both mentioned support for the idea of taking these question 3 questions and moving them into the effectiveness monitoring working group and using them as a really solid starting point. Potentially that would be keeping these questions, using them as a template to define and write the fish questions that group will be working on. There are also, sorry, I don't have it up in front of me. There are a couple other options for what we could do with question 3. We could vote on it as another question that would move into a question package. We could put it in a parking lot. But I was hearing some preference for and support for moving this into the effectiveness monitoring group and addressing it there. So let me just pause and see if folks have thoughts on that. And I see Julie's hand is up.
Yeah, this is a really bonehead question, and I hope that doesn't take us into too long a discussion. I'm happy for just a quick response. But I'm a little bit confused because I'm on the the Department of Forestry page for the private forest accord, and it mentions um, uh, the AMPC and compliance monitoring, but not effectiveness monitoring. So somehow I had missed that there's a separate effectiveness monitoring, and I'm a little bit confused about what the distinction is between what we do, because the definition of what we do seems like
Effectiveness monitoring is part of the adaptive management program.
Yeah, that's what we do, Julie.
okay.
Yes.
So
This wouldn't move this out of our committee, Julie. It would just, we created a subgroup that would help us get started.
okay.
Monitoring. So the idea would be this would kick these to that subgroup to add to the mix in the conversation of, you know, what do we need to be looking at for effectiveness monitoring over time for this group. So it would come back, these would all come back to this group.
Okay, given that, I would prefer not to wait myself. I think that these tie clearly to the goals and are the sorts of questions we need to answer, and I'd prefer to include them.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, that's a helpful clarification. I'm glad you asked that question. We were sort of imagining it like there's a bucket for the roads question, there's a bucket for steep slopes. Effectiveness monitoring is something this AMPC is working on, and amphibians. And so it was rather than, because I think on the table was not really doing anything with some of these questions in the amphibians package. So barring that, addressing them in effectiveness monitoring. I would agree with what you just said, Julie. I think these are really important questions. I would also like to move forward with them with my co-chair hat off and my co-chair hat back on. Will?
So I would second Julie in your comments with my hat, whatever hat I'm wearing today, my cone head, I guess. But I do think this sets up the effectiveness. I think this actually causes the reflection on the concerns we have and trying to establish this look back, this persistence or population trends over time, and seeing where those might be affected by these rules. So I like them being in there.
Thanks, Will. Josh?
Yeah, I also support including these in the amphibians package. I will say, as a member of the effectiveness monitoring work group, if we can't get consensus or close enough to consensus on including this, I will champion them as part of the effectiveness monitoring question. But I would also like to include these here. I do think they're really solid questions. And also, if we put these in the package, right, we're going to send it to IRST. They're going to give us feedback. And that kind of gives us a first cut too on what they might be thinking of for effectiveness monitoring when we get to the fish species. So there's another utility to including these now, which is we'll get the earlier feedback from IRST that I think will inform how we develop the effectiveness monitoring questions. Do we need to add more for amphibians? Is this a good framework for fish, or is it missing something? That kind of feedback from IRST earlier would be useful when we're developing effectiveness monitoring. So I'd like to move forward with them now, if we can get there.
Great, appreciate that. Looking at the time and thinking about options for moving forward, I'm hearing some support for including these question 3 sub-questions actually in an amphibians package. And I think my proposal would be that we pause here and bring question 3 and discussion of question 3 into our next meeting to continue conversation around this. Are folks okay with that, or does anyone want to take the next 2 minutes for some short conversation around that path? Any concerns or other ideas? Seth?
I'm okay with that, with what you're proposing, Stacy. The question I would have is, do we want to, and maybe this is more for Terry, would the first 2 questions that we voted on, would we get those to IRST in some fashion so that they can start moving and reviewing while we're discussing these others, and what to do with them? I'm just curious where this puts us
Right. And I think that I was kind of having a similar question of, all right, are we doing, since we've got these two questions finalized, first two, are we doing a package there and voting on that at the next meeting? And then question three becomes, the second amphibians package that's soon thereafter, or are you trying to do one giant one? And given that the question three is not has not been honed, much less which specific rules specified. Um, you know, that brings up the question of what to do in relation to those question three sub questions in terms of a package for the next time, and what to do in terms of a package for questions 1 and 2.
Hey, this is Casey. I'm sorry. Is it okay if I jump in and just ask Terry a question, Chair?
Please, yep, go for it.
Okay, Terry, I appreciated that. To the specificity, it feels like we're at an early stage of the specificity, and we haven't, for example, identified particular rules for any of the other research questions. And maybe that's an oversight, and maybe we should have. But it seems like this is an opportunity to stay as the policy advisors, to stay at the policy advisor level as opposed to the technical level. So I would propose broad areas rather than specific language about specific rules.
Thanks, Casey. I think we're not going to resolve question 3 in the last 3 minutes here. I would like to continue conversation around it because I think there's some preferences being expressed, but no real clarity on sort of, the pathway for question 3. Although I think generally everyone acknowledges that there's some real value in these questions. It's just sort of where they live and how quickly they move. So I would propose that we tackle that at our next meeting, with the caveat that I need to check in with Seth and Terry about what else we need to get done. Will, did you have a final comment here?
Well, is there a timing requirement of trying to get questions 1 and 2 to them earlier, then add a 3? I wasn't sensing that. I think they had enough work in front of them. So will we have a month to take this together and get the question firmed up a little bit better?
Harry, do you want to add on to this? I think part of the challenge is this July deadline that the AMPC would bring a suite of questions to the Board of Forestry. They would discuss and then vote on in their September meeting. We haven't quite figured out if there's opportunity to bring things later, but as it's written, it's sort of this every other year marker where the AMPC brings questions to the board, they vote on their agenda and basically how they're prioritizing the funding and what actually gets worked on, if you will. So there is a bit of a crunch, which is why we've been pushing, because I think collectively we would like to honor the statute and bring an amphibians question as part of that package to the board. Does that make sense? So there is a bit of that's why we've been pushing a little harder on this one to try to get something done. That said, it could be split into 2. Terry, Seth, want to add anything to that?
I think the IRT would probably not, even if you handed the 2 questions to them in full package today or in April, they're probably not going to be able to get you scoping proposals for that July deadline for you folks. Having said that, there is the opportunity to do an addendum to the, after the board makes a decision in September, to circle back with them, say 6 months later as an addendum and say, okay, here's the phase 2. And generally it's probably not ideal, but in this instance, since it's just the beginning and there's a lot of learning and steep learning curve, that's workable. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful, Terry. I guess so to that end, I like your proposal, Stacy. We can just we can table this for now. I think we made good progress on question 1 and 2, and then we can move right back into this and at the next meeting with question
Great.
3.
Well, really appreciate the discussion. Thanks everyone for showing up and being able to move through things more quickly. I really appreciate that. And we'll tackle these at our next meeting, potentially with some other items on the agenda, like Terry said at the top. And I think we're good to adjourn unless there's anything else, Terry, I'm forgetting.
I don't think so.
Okay,
Thank you all. Really
Great.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
thanks everyone. Take care.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.